A millionaire was mistaken for an IT tech by the new secretary and fell madly in love. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment letting us know which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Alice Evans didn't have time to panic. It was her first day as an executive assistant, and fate was already working against her. The system at Foster Enterprises was down. Employees were running around like crazy. "The server's down!" Someone yelled. "Nothing works. We've lost all the files. I didn't back up the reports." Alice rubbed her temples. Great. First morning, and it already felt like she was in charge of the Titanic. She grabbed the phone and dialed IT support. Busy line. Tried again. Nothing. "Wonderful. We're stuck in a digital apocalypse," she grumbled, slamming the phone onto the desk. And it was right at that moment that a tall, well-dressed man walked into the office. Impeccable suit, polished shoes, serious expression. He looked calm, watching the chaos around him with his arms crossed, as if this were just a normal Tuesday. Alice didn't waste time. "Finally! You took way too long," she marched up to him. "No beating around the bush. The system is down and it's a mess. Fix this now." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Excuse me?" Alice stomped her foot. "Excuse me nothing. I said, fix it." She emphasized each word. "Before this company burns down and I get fired before I even find out where the bathroom is." He let out a small laugh, looking more entertained than worried. "What if I told you I can't fix it?" Alice sighed loudly. "Oh, great. First day and they send me a clueless tech guy. Look, I've already wasted 5 minutes of my life with you. If you don't want to work, at least pretend to care." The man seemed to enjoy this even more. "So is that what I'm supposed to do? Pretend to care?" "Yes, and work on that computer like you're solving the cure for the century." "Got it." He shook his head with an ironic look. "All right, here we go." Alice shoved him into the chair as gently as she would shove a refrigerator. "Hurry up." The man adjusted his suit, sighed theatrically, and started typing something on the keyboard. Alice leaned over to the side, watching his every move. "Wow, so slow. Are you typing with just one finger?" "You need to be patient. You need to be fast. This isn't an IT course for seniors." The man stopped typing and looked at her. "Am I really being asked to work faster by you?" "Yes. What do you think this is, brain surgery? It's just a computer. Click, fix it, and let's move on." He sighed again, pretending to suffer, and went back to working on the machine. 5 minutes later, "Well, finished?" "Almost. Almost. My grandfather could have fixed this before taking his nap." He looked away from the computer and stared at her, clearly enjoying himself. "Was your grandfather in IT?" "No, but even he would know you're stalling." The man actually laughed this time. Impatient, Alice grabbed the phone again. "Hello? Security? The IT guy needs to be escorted out because he can't fix a basic system." The man raised his hands in surrender. Okay, calm down. Look, watch this." He pressed a single key and suddenly all the screens went back to normal. The entire office breathed a sigh of relief. "Hallelujah." Alice clapped her hands. "Finally. That wasn't so hard, was it?" He stood up slowly, adjusting his wristwatch. "That was interesting." Alice sighed in relief. "Great. Now you can go up to the next floor and fix their system." The man raised an eyebrow and his smile grew. "And who said I work here?" Alice froze. The sentence hung in the air for a few seconds, but her brain took a moment to process it. It was at that exact moment that a man in a gray suit entered the room, hurried and a bit sweaty. "Sir, everyone's waiting for you in the board meeting." Alice blinked. "Sir? Board meeting?" The information exploded in her mind like fireworks. She froze, her eyes wide as if she'd been shocked. The man in front of her wasn't the IT guy. He was Arthur Foster, the new CEO of the company. The silence in the office was deafening. Everyone in the room realized the disaster before Alice did. Arthur slowly turned to her, crossed his arms, and tilted his head slightly, a sly smile on his face. Alice felt her spine freeze. "So, Miss Evans, any more orders for me, or are you satisfied now?" Alice felt the world crumble. Her face turned as red as a tomato, her hands started sweating, and her mind screamed, "I'm fired," in flashing neon. Arthur chuckled quietly, clearly enjoying himself. Alice, on the other hand, wanted to dig a hole and disappear. The silence in the room was deafening. Alice could feel the sweat running down her neck. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She blinked, hoping by some miracle reality would disintegrate and she would wake up safe in her bed, far away from this nightmare. But no, there was Arthur Foster, the CEO of the company, standing right in front of her. And her? She had just treated him like an incompetent technician, yelled at him, and practically dragged him to fix a computer. She was in big, big trouble. Arthur was still looking at her with amusement in his eyes, arms crossed, as if he were savoring the moment. "Miss Evans, you look surprised." Alice swallowed hard. Her brain seemed to have frozen, just like the computers earlier. The employees around her didn't dare to breathe loudly. Some tried to hide behind their screens, while others exchanged glances, almost saying, "She's done for." It was nice knowing her. Arthur's assistant, still waiting by his side, seemed a little uncomfortable. Maybe because he had just witnessed one of the worst corporate blunders in history. Arthur, on the other hand, seemed genuinely entertained. He tilted his head slightly. "You know, I've never received such a direct order in my entire career. Bossy, huh?" Alice opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her whole body screamed for her to do something, anything, to get out of this mess. But the best she could manage was a nervous, completely inappropriate laugh. "Ha ha, ha, ah, great." Now, on top of being humiliated, she looked like a crazy person laughing to herself. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Was that an attempt at a laugh or a short circuit? Both? He gave a half smile. Interesting. Alice felt her stomach churn. She needed to get out of there. Or disappear into thin air. Or be swallowed by the floor. Anything would be better than staying at Arthur Foster's sharp gaze. She tried to gather herself, even though her legs felt like jelly. "Look, Mr. Foster, I honestly didn't know who you were." Arthur let out a fake sigh of regret. "And to think I spent 5 minutes being treated like an incompetent intern, my ego will never be the same." The room filled with muffled coughs and sniffles. Clearly, the employees trying not to laugh. Alice felt her face get even hotter. "I'm so sorry. It was an honest mistake. How was I supposed to know?" Arthur took a step forward, his intense gaze making Alice want to run away. "And do you yell at all the new hires around here? Or was I a special case?" I was just trying to fix the problem." Alice tried to explain, desperately. Arthur pretended to think for a moment. "It was efficient, I'll give you that. Rude, but efficient." Alice opened her mouth to defend herself, but was interrupted by a loud cough. Arthur's assistant glanced at his watch, nervous. "Sir, the directors are waiting in the meeting room." Arthur nodded calmly, but kept his eyes on Alice. "Ah, yes, the meeting." Alice tried to calm herself. Maybe he was in a hurry and would forget about her. Maybe this was just a nightmare, and she'd wake up soon. But then Arthur smiled slowly and calculatingly. "Miss Evans, you're going to come with me." Alice froze. "What?" "I said you're coming with me." He looked around. "Since you like giving orders so much, I want you to personally explain to the directors what happened with the system." The whole office held its breath. Alice felt her knees weaken. She was about to walk into a high-level meeting next to the CEO of the company to explain the mistake of the day. Suddenly, selling coconut water on the beach seemed like a tempting option. Alice followed Arthur through the hallways, feeling the employees' stares boring into her back. "Sir, I really don't think it's necessary for me to go to this meeting." Arthur didn't stop walking. "But I think it is." Alice bit her lip to stop herself from letting out a desperate sigh. They entered the elevator, and for a moment, there was an awkward silence. Until Arthur turned his face slightly toward her. "Oh, just so you know, you're the first person to drag me into fixing a computer." Alice covered her face with her hands. "Please, stop reminding me of that." Arthur laughed. "Not that I would want to." The meeting room was huge, filled with directors in suits. When Arthur entered, everyone immediately stood up. Alice felt her spine stiffen. Arthur walked to the center of the room, calm as if nothing had happened. "Gentlemen, before we begin, our new assistant, Miss Evans, would like to share how she solved the system issue this morning." 20 pairs of eyes pierced through her at once. Alice swallowed hard. She thought of 1,000 ways to get out of this situation. Make up an excuse? Run away? Pretend she was crazy? But there was no way out. So she took a deep breath and blurted out all at once. "Well, I gave the wrong order." There was a deadly silence. Arthur just raised an eyebrow. Alice squeezed her eyes shut tightly. "Actually, I mistook the CEO of the company for an IT technician and made him fix the computer." There was a dry sound. Alice opened her eyes and saw one of the directors dropping his pen out of pure shock. Arthur, on the other hand, was just smiling, and efficiently, I must say. Alice shrank in her chair. One of the directors cleared his throat and tried to hide his laugh. Arthur turned to Alice, clearly savoring the moment. "I must say, Miss Evans, you know how to make an entrance at a company." Alice felt her soul leave her body. What was next? A fire-in? A month of jokes? Arthur crossed his arms, thoughtful. "I wonder if I should reconsider your position. Maybe I should transfer you to IT support, since you have so much experience with orders there." The directors couldn't hold back their laughter anymore. Alice wanted to disappear. But next to her, Arthur Foster seemed more interested than ever, and that was terrifying. Alice felt Arthur's gaze fixed on her while the meeting room still echoed with the muffled laughter of the directors. She wanted to vanish, evaporate, run to the mountains and raise goats. Anything would be better than staying there. But no, she was stuck in that chair, staring at the CEO she had mistaken for a technician and ordered to fix a computer. Arthur still seemed to be enjoying the whole thing. He turned to the directors and clapped his hands together, wrapping up the moment casually. "All right, now that everyone's had their morning dose of entertainment, let's get back to work." The directors quickly composed themselves, adjusting their ties and trying to regain their seriousness. Alice hid behind her notebook, hoping no one would bring up the disaster again. But of course, Arthur Foster wasn't going to let her off that easily. He looked directly at her, crossed his arms, and said, "Oh, and Miss Evans, after the meeting, come to my office. We need to talk." That was it. It was over. Alice felt her soul leave her body. She was going to be fired. She knew it. After all the effort she'd put into getting this job, she'd managed to throw it away in less than a morning. Congratulations to her. Alice spent the entire meeting not paying attention to anything. The charts, the financial reports, the company's growth projections, everything was a blur in her mind. She just stared at the clock, watching the time tick by until her inevitable reckoning. With every minute that passed, her anxiety only grew. She started imagining all the possible scenarios. Arthur would yell at her and fire her on the spot. He'd ask HR to prepare her termination letter and escort her out of the building. He'd stay silent and just point to the door, a real final blow to her dignity. Each option seemed worse than the last. And the worst part, Arthur didn't seem in any hurry to end her suffering. In fact, he was completely calm, as if he'd forgotten she even existed, which made everything even more terrifying. When the meeting finally ended, Alice stayed behind, waiting for everyone to leave the room. Her heart was in her throat. Arthur stood up calmly, grabbed his documents, and glanced at her. "Let's go, Evans." Alice closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "May the employment gods have mercy on me." And she followed Arthur to his office. Arthur Foster's office was something out of a luxury catalog. Dark wooden furniture, shelves full of impeccably organized books, a panoramic view of the city, and in the center, him. Arthur sat in the chair like a king on his throne, rested his elbows on the desk, and gestured for Alice to sit in the chair across from him. She slowly obeyed, feeling like a child called to the principal's office. For a few seconds, he just stared at her in silence. Alice tried to smile. "So, Mr. Foster, you wanted to talk to me?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Foster? Funny. Earlier, I was just the IT guy and the guy who needs to work faster." Alice felt her face turn red. Honest mistake?" Arthur let out a low laugh. "Sure, and it was fun, I'll admit." Alice blinked, surprised. "Fun? Yeah, it's not every day someone gives me orders in my own company." Alice sighed with relief. Maybe he wasn't that angry after all. But then Arthur leaned slightly forward and smiled. However, the relief disappeared immediately. "We need to talk about your future here." Alice swallowed hard. My future?" Arthur nodded. "Yes, your attitude today showed me something interesting." Alice held her breath. "Am I impulsive? You're stubborn, bossy, and have no filter." "Great," Arthur laughed. "And you're quick, determined, and not easily intimidated." Alice's eyes went wide. Is a compliment a statement? She wasn't sure if she should feel flattered or offended. Arthur interlaced his fingers and watched her with interest. "I need someone like that by my side." Alice almost fell off her chair. "Sorry, what?" Arthur smiled slightly. "I'm promoting you." Alice froze. Time seemed to stop. You want to promote me? Yes. Why? Arthur shrugged. Because you entertain me. Alice was stunned. That's your reason? And also because I think you have potential. She eyed him suspiciously. So, you want to keep me around just to laugh at me? Arthur didn't confirm, but didn't deny it either. Alice narrowed her eyes. So, what kind of promotion is this? Arthur smiled. Starting today, you'll be my personal assistant. Alice swallowed hard. Personal? As in, directly to you? Exactly. Alice felt her hands sweat. She already had enough trouble being the assistant to the directors. Now she'd have to deal with Arthur Foster directly? She tried to find a way out. What if I say no? Arthur raised an eyebrow. You want to say no? Alice bit her lip. Is that a serious question or a trick to intimidate me? Arthur smiled. Both. Alice took a deep breath. What could she do? If she refused, she might lose her job. If she accepted, well, she'd have to deal with a sarcastic, unpredictable boss every day. And for some bizarre reason, the idea didn't sound so bad. She looked at Arthur and made her decision. All right, I accept. Arthur smiled with satisfaction. Great. Alice felt a chill run down her spine. She was absolutely sure that this decision was going to change her life. She just didn't know if it would be for better or for worse. Alice left Arthur's office with weak legs. She wasn't sure if she had just received a promotion or a death sentence. Her brain was still trying to process what had just happened. In less than a day, she had yelled at the company's CEO, confused him with an IT guy, ordered him to work faster, and somehow, absurdly, this led to a new role directly by his side. Let's have a little fun with those who only read the comments. Type McDonald's in the comments. Only those who got this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. Her heart was still racing as she walked down the hallway. What exactly does a personal assistant to the CEO do? Get coffee? Organize his schedule? Or worse, stand by his side all the time, dealing with his orders and sarcastic personality? She walked into the administrative office like she was carrying a state secret. All eyes were on her the moment she stepped in. People whispered in the corners, some laughed quietly, others stared at her like she was a ghost of a former employee who had died for saying something wrong to Arthur Foster. I heard you survived, said one of the employees, pulling the chair next to hers. Tell me, how was your execution? Alice slumped into the chair, dropped her shoulders, and let out a defeated sigh. He didn't fire me. The entire office went silent for a moment. Then a wave of whispers and murmurs spread. What? A woman's eyes widened, but everyone saw what happened in the meeting room. Not only was I not fired, Alice sighed, I was promoted. The commotion was immediate. Stifled screams, people holding onto their desks, a man even dropped his coffee mug. One of the older employees approached, looking at Alice like she was some kind of scientific anomaly. Mr. Foster promoted you? Straight to his personal assistant. This time, the commotion was replaced by a terrified silence. Alice frowned. Okay, what's the problem? A woman with her hair tied in a tight bun and a serious posture looked at Alice like she was about to face a minefield. You've just been thrown into the lion's den. A guy who seemed a bit younger leaned forward. Mr. Foster never had a personal assistant. Alice blinked. What? He has assistants, of course, the woman continued. But personal assistants? No, he fires them all before even considering the possibility. Alice felt a chill run down her spine. So, why me? No one knew the answer. But one thing was certain, she was in trouble. Before she could process this new information, the phone on the desk beside her rang. The receptionist answered, stayed silent for a moment, and then looked directly at Alice. Miss Evans. Alice swallowed hard. Yes, Mr. Foster is calling you to his office. The entire office held its breath. Good luck, someone murmured in the back. Alice wanted to scream. She slowly got up, like she was marching to the slaughter, and walked toward the CEO's office. Each step felt like it weighed a ton. When she reached the door, she took a deep breath 3 times, ran her hands through her hair to look somewhat presentable, and knocked. Come in. The deep voice echoed from inside. She turned the doorknob, opened the door, and found Arthur Foster sitting behind his desk, going through some papers. He didn't even look up when she walked in. Alice stepped closer, feeling more nervous with every passing second. You called for me? Arthur finally lifted his gaze, and Alice felt a chill run down her spine. He had that analytical, intense look that seemed to read her every thought without saying a single word. "Yes, sit down." Alice settled into the chair and tried not to look too tense. Arthur twirled a pen between his fingers, like he was considering something. "You start officially today as my personal assistant." She forced a smile. "Good, because I was worried I wouldn't have anything to do." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Sarcasm on the first day? Brave." Alice straightened up in her chair. "Sorry, it's just the shock." Arthur set the pen down on the desk and leaned slightly forward. "You'll have direct access to my schedule, my meetings, my trips, and anything else I need you to take care of for me. Your job is to make sure I don't waste time on unnecessary things." Alice blinked. "So basically, I need to make sure you never get upset about anything?" "Exactly." She took a deep breath. "Sounds difficult." Arthur smiled. "It will be." Alice felt like crying. But then, Arthur pulled out a black folder and slid it across the desk to her. "Your first challenge." She picked up the folder and opened it, looking over the papers inside. "What's this?" "A charity dinner. I'm one of the speakers. You need to organize everything." Alice flipped through the papers, seeing the guest list, the location, the schedule details. "This is in 3 days." "Yes. And you're giving this to me now?" "Yes." Alice felt a wave of panic. "Mr. Foster." Arthur raised a hand to stop her. "Challenges are part of the job. If you can handle this without me having to worry about it, then I'll know I made the right choice." Alice closed her eyes for a second, trying not to freak out. She had to plan a high-class event in 3 days, without missing a single detail? Great. She stood up, holding the folder like it was a cement brick. "Okay, I'll take care of it." Arthur smiled slightly, satisfied. "Great." Alice turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she heard his voice again. "Oh, and Alice." She slowly turned around. "Yes?" Arthur rested his chin on his hands, smiling that usual enigmatic smile. "You're more interesting than I expected." Alice felt a strange shiver run down her spine, but she didn't wait to figure out what he meant. She simply left the room as quickly as possible because she already had enough problems to deal with. Alice spent the next few hours running around the office, calling suppliers, confirming RSVPs, organizing speeches, and trying to figure out how the heck she had ended up in this situation. She only knew one thing: surviving her first day as Arthur Foster's assistant was a victory. Now, she had to survive the rest of the week. Alice left Arthur's office holding the black folder like it was a bomb ready to explode. A high-profile charity dinner. In 3 days, no experience, no room for mistakes. Of course, nothing in her life could ever be simple. She walked down the hallway, feeling the eyes of her colleagues on her. Everyone was curious about how she was still employed. Some were even whispering, trying to guess what had happened in the CEO's office. Alice didn't have time for gossip. She needed to figure out how to organize an event of this scale without causing a disaster. When she got to her desk, she opened the folder and started reviewing the documents. A guest list with the names of powerful business people, influential politicians, and celebrities. The venue, a luxurious hotel in the city center. The menu needed to be chosen, the decorations adjusted, the speeches reviewed. She felt a tightness in her chest. "What's going on now?" a familiar voice asked from beside her. Alice looked up at the woman with the tight bun, the same one who had warned her that working with Arthur was like stepping into a lion's den. "He gave me 3 days to organize a high-profile charity dinner," she replied, exasperated. The woman's eyes widened. "Ah, so he's already started the testing phase." Alice frowned. "What does that mean?" "Mr. Foster likes to test people. He throws impossible challenges to see how far they can go before they break." Alice blinked. "So he's literally waiting for me to fail?" The woman shrugged. "Or for you to surprise him. It depends on how you handle it." Alice slammed the folder shut with a snap. "Great. Now I have even more pressure." She glanced at the clock. If she stayed there feeling sorry for herself, she wouldn't even have time to make a mistake. She decided her first step was to figure out what was already in place and what needed to be done. She picked up the phone and started calling suppliers, trying to negotiate services, check contracts, and make sure everything was on track. The first call was to the company handling the decorations. After 4 failed attempts, someone finally answered. Hello. Hi, this is Alice Evans, Mr. Arthur Foster's personal assistant. I'm reaching out to confirm the details for the charity dinner decorations. Oh, sure. We have a bit of a problem. Alice felt a chill. What kind of problem? Well, the venue didn't approve the installation of the setup we planned. We need to redo the concept. Alice narrowed her eyes. And when were you planning on letting me know about this? Technically, now? Alice closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Okay, so can you redo it and send me the new proposal today? Actually, it would take at least a week. Alice almost threw the phone out the window. Are you telling me that 3 days before the event, I have no decorations? The silence on the other end was the confirmation she needed. Okay, I'll handle it. She hung up and massaged her temples. Breathe, Alice. You got this. She picked up the phone again and started calling other suppliers. All of them were either fully booked or charging an outrageous price. After half an hour, she managed to find a company willing to take on the job in record time. It would be expensive, but better than nothing. Meanwhile, other problems began popping up. The menu still wasn't settled. Arthur's speech wasn't ready. The invitations were late. The band canceled. With each new problem, Alice felt like she was getting closer to a nervous breakdown. In the middle of the afternoon, she went to Arthur's office to update him on the challenges. When she walked in, he was going through reports like everything was in perfect order. Reports, Mr. Foster. Arthur looked up. And what do you have for me? Alice pulled out a notebook. The decorator quit, the band canceled, the menu isn't approved, the invitations still haven't been sent, and... Oh, I haven't slept since I started dealing with this. Arthur rested his chin in his hands, a small smile at the corner of his lips. So basically, it's all a disaster. Alice let out a dramatic sigh. Basically. Arthur was silent for a moment, just watching her. Alice started feeling uncomfortable. Was he waiting for her to lose it? To quit? But, to her surprise, he picked up the phone and made a call. George, I want the dinner invitations on my desk by the end of the day. No excuses. He hung up and looked at Alice. The rest, you can handle. Alice blinked. That's it? Were you expecting a motivational speech? I was hoping for at least a good luck. Arthur tilted his head slightly. You don't need luck. You need coffee. Alice opened her mouth, then closed it. Okay, that's the first thing you've said today that actually makes sense. Arthur chuckled softly. You're doing better than I thought. Alice felt a small flicker of pride. So you don't think I'm going to fail miserably? Not yet. Wow, what an inspiring vote of confidence. Arthur just smiled, clearly enjoying himself. Alice sighed and left the room, ready to continue the battle. In the next 2 days, she worked non-stop, running back and forth, fixing the final details, making sure every piece was in the right place. On the last day, she finally managed to finalize the menu, replace the band, and approve the alternative decorations. When the time for the event finally came, Alice barely had a chance to catch her breath before slipping into an elegant dress and rushing to the venue to make sure everything was in order. She checked every detail as if her life depended on it. In the middle of the crowd, she saw Arthur arrive. He looked flawless, as always, but his eyes were searching for something. When he spotted her, he raised a glass of champagne and gave her an enigmatic look. Alice walked over to him, expecting some sarcastic comment. So, is everything in order? He asked. Yes. Against all odds, everything is perfect. Arthur gave a small smile. I had no doubts. Alice raised an eyebrow. Really? If you had failed, I would have already gotten angry calls. Alice let out a relieved laugh. Does this mean I passed your test? Arthur leaned in slightly. Let's see if you survive the next one. Alice shivered. She was sure her life would never be dull next to Arthur Foster. Alice had barely had time to breathe. Ever since she took on the impossible task of organizing the charity dinner in just 3 days, her life had turned into a whirlwind of phone calls, last-minute confirmations, and unexpected crises. She barely slept, surviving on coffee, and her sanity was hanging by a thread. But now, on the day of the event, everything was ready. The hotel ballroom was flawless, decorated with sophisticated luxury. The tables were elegantly set, the lighting was perfect, and even the napkins had been folded identically, down to the last detail. Alice walked through the room, checking every detail. The chef made sure dinner would be served on time. The new band was getting ready, and guests were starting to arrive. She felt a small sense of relief, but didn't allow herself to celebrate yet. Not until everything was over without a disaster. She wore an elegant black dress, fitting for the occasion, but her shoes were already killing her feet from walking back and forth. She grabbed the tablet to review the guest list when she heard a deep, unmistakable voice behind her. "Well, you've made it this far." Alice turned around and found Arthur Foster standing there, observing the room with his analytical gaze. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, so perfectly fitted it seemed like he was born in it. His hair was meticulously styled, and he held a glass of champagne as if he had all the time in the world. Alice crossed her arms. "It's not over yet. There's still time for something to blow up." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "An optimistic view." "Realistic," Alice corrected. Arthur took a sip of his drink and tilted his head slightly, studying her with that look that always made her feel uncomfortable. "You look tired." Alice let out a short laugh. "Is that a compliment? Just an observation. I'll take it as a recognition of my effort." Arthur gave a small smile. "If that makes you happy." Alice sighed and went back to checking her task list. But before she could finish, she was interrupted by a hurried waiter. "Miss Evans, we have a problem in the kitchen." Alice felt her heart race. "What now?" "The head chef is freaking out. He said he got a last-minute request to change the main dish and is threatening to cancel everything." Alice closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Give me 2 minutes." She looked at Arthur, who just smiled. "Good luck." Alice hurried out and entered the hotel kitchen, where she found the chef gesturing frantically, surrounded by confused assistants. "I spent 3 days planning this menu, and now someone wants me to change everything? No, this is outrageous." Alice raised her hands, trying to calm things down. "Okay, let's fix this. Who made the request?" One of the assistants stepped forward hesitantly. It was one of the VIP guests. "He's allergic to the main dish." Alice felt a weight lift off her shoulders. "So why don't we just prepare an alternative for him?" The chef's eyes widened. "Alternative? I don't have extra ingredients." Alice looked around, spotted a tray of salmon, and pointed. "What's that?" "Smoked salmon for the appetizers." "Perfect. We'll make a special dish for him with salmon. The rest of the menu stays the same." The chef crossed his arms, considering the idea. That could work." Alice forced a smile. "Great. So, let's stop freaking out and make this happen." The chef huffed, but started giving orders to the assistants. Alice left the kitchen feeling exhausted but satisfied to have solved another problem before it turned into a disaster. She returned to the ballroom and found Arthur exactly where she left him, watching the scene as if it were a private show. "Did you save the dinner?" Alice sighed. "The chef wanted to blow everything up, but I convinced him to stick to the plan." Arthur laughed. "I'd say you've got a talent for handling crises. I'd say I'm too young to have an ulcer, but here we are." Arthur raised his glass to her. "To your first big event." Alice hesitated but took a champagne glass from a passing waiter and toasted with him. "May it not be the last." Arthur took a sip, then looked straight at her. "That depends on you." Alice felt a slight shiver at his tone, but before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of an important guest. She spent the rest of the night making sure everything went according to plan. She watched Arthur's speech, dealt with small surprises, and tried to ignore the strange feeling that somehow he was always watching her. When the event finally ended, guests began to leave, and Alice felt like she could finally breathe. She took off her shoes under the table and threw herself into a chair in the corner of the empty room. Her feet ached, her head throbbed, but she had made it. Arthur walked over, hands in his pockets, looking at her with a playful gleam in his eyes. "So how do you feel?" Alice sighed. "Like I ran a marathon in high heels." Arthur smiled. "You did a good job." Alice's eyes widened. "Was that a compliment?" "It was a fact." Alice rolled her eyes. "You're incapable of giving a direct compliment, huh?" Arthur just smiled. "The important thing is that you understood." She shook her head, too tired to argue. "Right, and now?" Arthur took out his phone, typed something quickly, then put it back in his pocket. "Now you rest. But tomorrow at 8 in the morning I want you in my office. We have a new agenda to discuss." Alice groaned. "Tomorrow? Don't you ever rest?" "No," she sighed, grabbed her shoes and struggled to get up. "All right, I'm going home before you give me another impossible task." Arthur watched her for a moment before responding. "Good night, Alice." She blinked. It was the first time he called her by her first name. Alice wasn't sure what to think about that, so she just gave a nod and left. When she got into the taxi, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw Arthur still standing at the hotel entrance, watching her with that enigmatic expression she still couldn't figure out. She didn't know what Arthur Foster really wanted, but she knew one thing. Working with him would be anything but boring. Now, all she wanted was a bed, a pillow, and to forget that her life had been turned upside down since meeting that man. But something told her that this was just the first of many chaotic nights with him. Alice woke up to the alarm ringing for the third time. Her body protested the idea of getting up, but the memory of Arthur's words echoed in her mind. "Tomorrow, at 8 in the morning, I want you in my office." She groaned, rolled over in bed, feeling every muscle in her body ache after the madness of organizing that charity dinner. All she wanted was a few more hours of sleep, but if she had learned anything about Arthur Foster, it was that he wasn't the type to accept excuses. She forced herself out of bed and dragged herself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face and quickly tying her hair into a bun. She chose a dark blazer and dress pants, trying to look professional enough to avoid giving Arthur any more reason to question her competence. She grabbed a quick coffee and rushed to the office. When she walked into the building, she noticed that several people were watching her. It had been a few days since she'd become the center of office gossip, but now it seemed even worse. As soon as she got to her desk, she found a pile of documents waiting for her. She sighed and started organizing everything when her phone rang. "Alice Evans." "You're late." Alice almost dropped the phone. She quickly glanced at the clock. It was 8:03. 3 minutes late doesn't count," she replied, indignantly. "If you were in an important meeting and showed up 3 minutes late, would you still be considered on time?" Alice sighed. "I'm on my way." She rushed up and walked to Arthur's office. When she entered, he was sitting at his desk, flipping through some papers. His eyes lifted to her as soon as she closed the door. "Good morning, Mr. Foster." "Depends on how this morning goes." Alice sat down across from him, crossing her legs, waiting for him to say something other than intimidating phrases. Arthur grabbed a black folder and slid it across the desk to her. "This is your new task." Alice opened the folder and found a series of internal documents, contracts, and a tight schedule of meetings. "And what exactly do you need me to do with this?" "You're now part of my strategic team. I need you to organize and review these contracts, making sure everything aligns with our guidelines before the investor meeting on Friday." She blinked. "Wait, does this mean I'll be attending that meeting?" Arthur gave a half smile. "You've already proven you can handle pressure. I want to see how you do in the real business world." Alice felt a chill. "I'm not sure if I should feel honored or terrified. Both are fitting feelings." She closed the folder and took a deep breath. "All right, I'll take care of it." Arthur leaned forward, elbows on the table, interlacing his fingers. "Aren't you going to ask why I'm giving you this responsibility?" Alice looked him in the eye. "I don't need to." "You want to see how far I can go before I break." Arthur chuckled softly. "Smart." Alice stood up, grabbing the documents. Smart would have been turning down this job. "But you didn't turn it down." "Not yet." Arthur watched her as she walked out of the room. "You won't turn it down." She rolled her eyes and closed the door behind her. In the following hours, she dove into the contracts. They were long, filled with technical terms and complex clauses. Her head throbbed, but she wasn't going to give up. If Arthur wanted to test her, then she would show him she was up for the challenge. Before she knew it, it was almost 7 in the evening. The office was beginning to empty, but she still had a lot to review. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her she hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. She stood up, stretched her body, and grabbed her purse. She was about to leave when she heard Arthur's voice behind her. "Do you usually work this late?" Alice turned around and saw Arthur standing in the doorway of his office, watching her with curiosity. "I needed to finish this." "You could have done it tomorrow." "I could have, but I'd rather finish it now." Arthur walked over, looking at the documents on her desk. "Did you find any inconsistencies in the contracts?" A few small details that could be used against the company in case of a lawsuit. I made some notes. Arthur picked up one of the pages and reviewed the marks she had made. Impressive. Alice smiled. Was that a compliment? Don't get used to it, she laughed. Why are you still here? Don't you have a fancy mansion to go back to? Arthur stared at her for a moment, then shrugged. Maybe I just like seeing how far you can go, Alice scoffed. If that's the goal, you'll need patience. Arthur gave a half smile. We'll see. He turned to leave, but before exiting, he stopped at the door. Are you hungry? Alice furrowed her brow. What? I asked if you're hungry. She hesitated. Yes. Why? Arthur glanced at the clock. I'm going to dinner. You can come and tell me more about those inconsistencies in the contracts. Alice stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious or just having fun at her expense. Is this a test? If you want to consider it that way. Alice sighed. Whatever, as long as food's involved. Arthur gave a small smile and nodded. Let's go. Alice grabbed her things and followed him out of the office. She still wasn't sure where this partnership was going, but one thing was clear. Working with Arthur Foster was like a power game, and she had to make sure she wasn't the first to lose. Alice followed Arthur down to the building's underground garage, where he unlocked a black sports car with a simple click. The vehicle looked like it came straight out of a luxury catalog, and Alice swallowed hard as she realized she'd never been so close to a car worth that much. She hesitated before getting into the passenger seat, taking in the smell of leather and advanced technology around her. Arthur slid in next to her with his usual calm and started the engine, which purred like a wild animal. I hope you don't drive like a maniac, Alice said, fastening her seatbelt as if her life depended on it. Arthur gave her an amused look before smoothly accelerating. I drive better than you read contracts. Alice rolled her eyes but didn't reply. In the first few minutes of the drive, the silence between them felt comfortable. The city passed by, the lights from the buildings reflecting in the glass, and for the first time that day, Alice felt like she could breathe. The car stopped in front of a fancy restaurant downtown. Alice looked out the window, trying to hide her shock as she realized that place was way beyond what she could afford in a whole month's salary. Large glass doors reflected the sophisticated lighting inside, and customers dressed in impeccable clothes passed through the entrance, where a valet in a stylish uniform was already waiting to take Arthur's car keys. She turned to him, suspicious. This is the kind of place where a salad costs more than my rent, isn't it? Arthur gave a small smile, clearly enjoying himself. Is that a problem? Alice scoffed, unbuckling her seatbelt. For me, yes. For you, clearly not. Arthur got out of the car without responding and handed the keys to the valet, who smiled and gave a slight bow before getting into the vehicle. Alice got out from the other side, adjusting her blazer and feeling completely out of place in a place where even the air seemed expensive. Once inside, they were immediately greeted by the maitre d', a well-dressed gentleman who, upon seeing Arthur, smiled politely. Mr. Foster, it's a pleasure to welcome you back. Your table is ready. Alice raised an eyebrow, watching the scene. Do you have a reserved table here like it's your second home? Arthur simply followed the maitre d' without answering. Alice rolled her eyes and followed him to a reserved table in a corner of the restaurant, away from the curious gazes of the other guests. As soon as they sat down, a waiter immediately appeared with a bottle of wine. Your usual wine, Mr. Foster. Alice crossed her arms, watching as the waiter poured the glasses. Impressive. You're treated like royalty here. Arthur picked up the glass and swirled the liquid slowly before taking a sip. I'm treated like royalty everywhere. Alice let out a short, sarcastic laugh. You really have an indestructible ego, don't you? Arthur just smiled. It's not ego, it's reality. Alice shook her head and grabbed the menu. As soon as she opened it, she felt a slight panic seeing the prices. Oh, of course, a simple steak costs half my salary. How wonderful. Arthur leaned slightly over the table, watching her with an amused look. Choose whatever you want. Alice furrowed her brow, suspicious. Are you paying? I brought you here, didn't I? Yes, but you've also thrown me into impossible challenges before, so I'm not sure I trust your sudden kindness. Arthur chuckled softly and took another sip of wine. I just want to hear more about the inconsistencies in the contracts. Alice let out a dramatic sigh and closed the menu. Fine, but I warn you, if you're rude, I'll order the most expensive thing on the menu. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Is this how you always negotiate? Always. The waiter returned and Alice ordered a pasta dish, resisting the temptation to choose something outrageously expensive just to tease Arthur. He, on the other hand, ordered a steak without even looking at the menu. After the waiter left, Alice pulled out one of the contracts she had brought in her bag and spread it out on the table. All right, let's get to the point. The Millennium Holdings contract has a clause that, if misinterpreted, could allow them to back out of the agreement without paying a penalty. Arthur furrowed his brow, taking the document and reviewing it. You're right. Alice smiled, pleased. Of course I am. Arthur looked up at her, and the intensity in his gaze made Alice feel a little uncomfortable. You like being right. Who doesn't? Arthur gave a half smile, as if he were enjoying the conversation more than the information itself. Dinner arrived, and Alice sighed when she saw the beautifully arranged dish in front of her. This looks too good to eat. Arthur calmly cut a piece of his steak. Are you going to compliment the food before you try it? That doesn't seem like your style. Alice rolled her eyes and picked up her fork. Have you noticed that you love making comments about my style? Arthur just smiled, as if there was no need to confirm anything. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Alice was surprised to find that the food was truly amazing. After a long, exhausting day, that dinner felt like an unexpected reward. Once they finished, Arthur leaned back in his chair and watched Alice for a few seconds before speaking. Do you really think I'm trying to test you? Alice wiped her lips with the napkin before answering. I'm sure of it. Arthur tilted his head slightly. What if I told you I'm just curious to see how you handle pressure? Alice crossed her arms. That's exactly what a test is. Arthur let out a low laugh, and Alice realized that, for the first time, he seemed genuinely relaxed. You're interesting, Alice Evans. She raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? A statement of fact, she sighed. You need to learn how to compliment people without making it sound like a market analysis. Arthur just smiled. The waiter returned with the bill, and Alice watched as Arthur paid without even blinking. When they left the restaurant, the cold night air made Alice shiver. Arthur took the car keys from the valet and opened the door for her. Alice got in, still processing the night. As Arthur drove, she noticed that, despite the air of superiority he always carried, tonight had shown a different side of him. Something more relaxed, less rigid. When he stopped in front of the building where she lived, Alice hesitated before getting out of the car. Should I thank you for dinner? Arthur glanced at her sideways. If you want to. Alice rolled her eyes. Great. So thanks for the absurdly expensive dinner, and for not making me pay half my salary for it. Arthur chuckled softly. Good night, Alice. She got out of the car and walked into the building, still feeling his gaze on her. When she reached her apartment, she collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. She was right about one thing. Working with Arthur Foster was a real power game, and somehow she was starting to enjoy it. Alice woke up feeling the weight of the previous day on her shoulders. The dinner with Arthur Foster was still echoing in her mind. She turned over in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out why it bothered her so much. There was something in the way he analyzed her, as if he was always trying to predict her next move. It wasn't just a power game, but also some sort of constant test. She got up, went to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on her face. She needed to focus on what really mattered. Her work. The dinner had been an unexpected break from her chaotic routine, but now it was time to get back to the pace. She put on a pair of black dress pants and a blue blouse, grabbed her purse, and left the house, determined not to let Arthur's provocations get to her. When she arrived at the office, she noticed that the looks were even more intense than before. People were whispering, exchanging curious glances, and every time Alice passed by, the room would fall silent for a few seconds before the murmurs started again. She frowned and walked over to her closest coworker's desk. What's going on? It feels like I'm some kind of lab experiment being analyzed. The woman hesitated for a moment, then gave a little smile. Well, there are rumors. Alice crossed her arms. What kind of rumors? The coworker looked around before leaning in and whispering. That you and Miss Foster had dinner together last night. Alice blinked, surprised. And? And maybe it was something more. Alice let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Oh my God, seriously? Now I can't even have dinner without people making up rumors? The woman shrugged. You know how people are. Mr. Foster never takes anyone to dinner. Alice shook her head, grabbed the papers on her desk, and headed for Arthur's office. This was ridiculous. People had too much time for gossip and not enough time for work. She knocked on the door and heard his deep voice respond. Come in. Alice opened the door and found Arthur, as usual, immersed in paperwork. He looked up at her, and a slight smirk appeared on his lips. He looked more annoyed than usual. Alice threw the folder of documents on his desk. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Arthur picked up the folder and opened it calmly. Is something bothering you? Yes, the fact that the whole office now thinks that last night's dinner was some kind of romantic date. Arthur raised an eyebrow. And why does that bother you? Alice stared at him, incredulous. Oh, really? Are you enjoying this? Arthur closed the folder, leaned back in his chair, and crossed his arms, a clearly provocative look on his face. Maybe a little. Alice sighed and sat down in the chair across from him. I need a favor. Arthur interlaced his fingers, watching her closely. This is interesting. You usually try to solve everything on your own, and usually I can handle it, but I need you to help me put an end to this gossip. Arthur tilted his head slightly. And how exactly would I do that? I don't know. Maybe spread another rumor or deny any involvement, or, I don't know, say there's someone else in your life? Arthur chuckled softly. Alice, what people say doesn't change anything for me, but it changes things for me. Arthur looked at her for a moment, and then his smile faded a little. You're worried it'll hurt your credibility. Alice sighed. Of course, I worked hard to get this job. I don't want people thinking I'm here for any reason other than my skills. Arthur lightly tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking. All right, let's put an end to this. Alice blinked. Really? Yeah. He picked up the phone and made a quick call. Karen, please send an internal memo reinforcing that personal relationships at work shouldn't be a subject of speculation, and that any unfounded gossip will be taken seriously. Alice's eyes widened. Wait, you just made this a corporate rule? Arthur hung up the phone and smiled. You wanted to solve the problem, didn't you? Alice let out a nervous laugh. Oh my God, people are going to hate me. Arthur turned his attention back to the documents and casually said, Better for them to be intimidated by you than disrespect you. Alice watched him for a moment, trying to figure out if he was really protecting her or just enjoying the situation. Probably both. Before she could keep thinking about it, Arthur stood up and grabbed his jacket. We have a meeting in 30 minutes. I want you there. Alice furrowed her brow. A meeting with who? A potential new investor. And why should I be there? Arthur walked over to her and stopped beside her, leaning slightly down to look her in the eyes. Because I want to see how you handle a tough opponent. Alice felt a shiver run down her spine. Opponent? Arthur smiled. You'll understand. Alice followed him into the meeting room, feeling the rising tension in the air. Something told her this meeting would be much more than just a business negotiation. They entered the room, and Alice immediately recognized the man sitting at the table. Tall, well-dressed, sharp smile, and a calculating gaze. He had the same energy as Arthur, as if he was used to dominating any room. Arthur shook the man's hand firmly. David Lancaster, good to see you again. The man smiled. Arthur Foster, always a pleasure. Then his eyes turned to Alice. And who's this? Arthur glanced briefly at Alice before answering. My personal assistant. Alice extended her hand to shake his, keeping her posture strong. Alice Evans. David shook her hand and a smile played on his lips. Evans, I've heard of you. Alice raised an eyebrow. Heard that? The halls of Foster Enterprises talk a lot, and you seem to have made quite an impact. Alice kept her smile, but a hint of irritation stirred inside her. Arthur pulled out a chair to sit down and looked at David with his usual expression of masked boredom. Let's get to the point. The meeting started, and Alice quickly understood what Arthur meant by tough opponent. David was sharp, asking provoking questions and trying to steer the conversation to his own advantage. Arthur, however, remained unfazed. He countered each argument with precision, maintaining control of the situation without showing any signs of stress. Alice watched closely, absorbing every tactic. When David posed a tricky question about the contracts, Alice, without thinking, intervened. In Clause 4.3, there's a detail that protects our interests in this situation. You must have noticed it when reviewing the documents. David looked at her, surprised for a moment, then smiled. Interesting. Arthur gave Alice a satisfied side glance. The meeting continued until David finally stood up and shook Arthur's hand. Always an intriguing game, negotiating with you. Arthur smiled. The feeling is mutual. David turned to Alice and studied her one more time. And you, Miss Evans, I'll be keeping an eye on you. Alice kept her smile firm. I hope so. As they left the room, Arthur looked at her with a playful glint in his eyes. You handled him well. Alice smiled. I guess I'm learning from the best. Arthur just laughed. Alice then realized that she was actually starting to enjoy this game. She walked out of the meeting with her mind racing. The encounter with David Lancaster had been intense, and she could still feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. For the first time, she felt like she was truly part of this world of business, strategy, and subtle manipulations. But what was most intriguing was the way Arthur observed her, studying every one of her reactions, as if he was testing her once again. She didn't like the feeling of being an experiment. But at the same time, she couldn't deny that she was starting to enjoy the game. As soon as they returned to the office, Arthur walked straight to his office, but before entering, he looked back at Alice. Good work today. Alice blinked, surprised. Was that a compliment? Arthur smiled slightly. Take it however you like. Before she could respond, he entered the office and closed the door. Alice stood still for a few seconds, trying to understand the strange feeling that had washed over her. It was a mix of pride and confusion. Working for Arthur Foster was a constant challenge, but now she realized that somehow she was starting to enjoy this dynamic. She went back to her desk and collapsed into the chair, massaging her temples. Her inbox was full, but before opening any messages, she heard hurried footsteps and saw her coworker approaching with a look of pure excitement. What's going on now? Alice asked, already bracing herself for another absurd rumor. You were in the meeting with David Lancaster. Alice rolled her eyes. Wow, the gossip spreads fast around here. The woman leaned over the desk. How was it? They say he's one of the toughest negotiators to deal with. Alice sighed. It was intense, but Arthur knew exactly how to handle everything. He never lost control for a second. And you? Alice gave a half smile. I think I'm getting the hang of it. The coworker smiled, clearly impressed, and went back to her own desk. Alice looked at her screen and finally started answering the emails, but her mind was still stuck on the meeting. Throughout the afternoon, Arthur didn't show up. That was unusual, since he always popped in to make some provocative comment. But today, he seemed distant, too busy to test her. When the clock hit 7 in the evening, Alice realized she was still in the office, with just a few people around. The building was almost empty. She grabbed her things and walked hesitantly toward Arthur's office. She thought about knocking but decided to just peek through the partially open door. He was inside, sitting at the desk, brow furrowed as he read a document. You work too much, she said, walking in without being invited. Arthur looked up, surprised. This coming from the woman who stayed late reviewing contracts. Alice smiled and pulled out a chair. Fair enough, but unlike you, I'm not a workaholic, yet. Arthur leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. I like what I do, or maybe you just don't know how to do anything else. Arthur looked at her for a moment, then smiled. You're always trying to figure me out. I won't deny it, you're a walking mystery. Arthur studied her intensely for a few seconds before standing up and grabbing his jacket. Let's get out of here. Alice blinked, surprised. What? You're right. We've worked enough. It's time for a break. Alice hesitated. Is that an invitation? More like an order, actually. She laughed and grabbed her things. At least you're honest about it. They left the office together, and this time, Arthur didn't take her to an upscale restaurant. He drove to a low-key bar with dim lighting and background music, a place Alice never would have imagined him going. You surprised me, she said as they settled into a table in the back. Arthur ordered 2 drinks and smiled. How so? I expected something more elitist. You think I only go to fancy restaurants? Until now, that was the impression. Arthur chuckled softly. Surprising people is part of the game. Alice picked up her drink and took a sip. You play the game a lot, Arthur? He looked at her, his eyes shining with a mix of amusement and something else harder to read. And you're learning to play too. Alice couldn't tell if that was a compliment or a warning. They stayed at the bar for another hour, talking about business, challenges, and even a few trivial things. Alice noticed that Arthur, away from the corporate environment, was more relaxed. Still provocative, still sharp, but different. Let's play a little game for those who only read the comments. Type Coca-Cola in the comments. Only those who made it this far will understand. Now let's get back to the story. When they left the bar, the cold night air hit them, and Alice wrapped her arms around herself to protect from the chill. Arthur looked at her for a second before taking off his jacket and draping it over her shoulders. She looked at him, surprised. That was unexpected. You were shivering. She pulled the jacket tighter around her body and gave a half smile. So you have a gentleman's side. Arthur just smiled without replying. They walked to the car, and the silence between them was comfortable, but filled with something new. Something Alice wasn't quite sure how to name yet. When he stopped in front of her building, Alice hesitated before getting out. She turned to him and tried to ignore the strange feeling in her chest. It was a good night. Arthur nodded. Yeah, it was. Alice opened the door, but before getting out, she looked at him one last time. You're a mystery, Arthur Foster. He gave a half smile. And you like solving mysteries. She laughed, got out of the car, and walked into the building. As she went up to her apartment, she felt oddly light. Something was changing. She just didn't know yet where it would take her. The next morning, Alice woke up feeling strangely refreshed. Despite the twists and turns of the past week, the unexpected dinner, and the night out with Arthur, she didn't feel overwhelmed. On the contrary, she felt a renewed energy. She quickly got ready and left the house, determined to maintain her professional demeanor, even with the growing closeness between her and Arthur. After all, she still worked for him, and any involvement outside of work would be problematic for her reputation and her mental well-being. When she arrived at the office, she immediately felt the eyes on her. After Arthur's internal memo about office gossip, the tension among the staff seemed to have increased. Everyone seemed more careful with their whispers, but Alice could still feel the curious stares. She took a deep breath and ignored it, walking straight to her desk. There were emails to answer, meetings to schedule, and a new corporate event in the works. She was determined to focus on work and not on the man who had been complicating her life lately. But of course, Arthur wasn't going to make things easy. Good morning, Miss Evans. His deep voice sounded from behind her. Alice closed her eyes for a second before turning around. Good morning, Mr. Foster. Arthur watched her for a moment before crossing his arms. Looks like you slept well. Alice narrowed her eyes. And what does that mean? Arthur gave a small smile. Normally, you come in looking like you survived a hurricane. Not today, she scoffed. Was that a compliment? Just an observation. Alice rolled her eyes. So, what do I owe the honor of this early visit? Arthur handed her a document. I need you to review this for the investor meeting tomorrow. There are points I want you to look over and bring suggestions. Alice took the document, flipping through it quickly. You really like giving me extra work, huh? Arthur smiled. I like to see what you're capable of. Alice let out a dramatic sigh. Of course, because I'm an experiment for you. Arthur didn't deny it. 8 o'clock, in my office. I want to hear your thoughts. Alice shook her head, grabbed a coffee, and got to work. The day went by fast, and before she knew it, it was almost time for the meeting with Arthur. She reviewed the documents one more time before grabbing her notes and heading to his office. She knocked on the door and walked in. Arthur was standing, his back to her, looking out at the city through the large glass window. You know, you could have a worse view, Alice commented, closing the door. Arthur turned around and smiled. It's one of the perks of the job. Alice sat down and placed the documents on the desk. I've gone over everything. There are 3 clauses that need adjusting. Here are my suggestions. Arthur took the papers and looked them over, occasionally glancing at her as if he were processing something beyond the written words. Good work. Alice raised an eyebrow. What? You heard me. Alice laughed. Arthur Foster complimenting me. I need to mark this date. He just gave a half smile before resting his elbows on the desk and interlacing his fingers. Now that we've dealt with the boring stuff, I have another matter. Alice frowned. Another impossible task? Not exactly. Arthur paused for a moment before continuing. There's a gala in 2 days. I want you to come with me. Alice blinked, surprised. What? The event is a strategic business opportunity, but I need someone by my side who understands the ongoing negotiations. So, you want me to go as your assistant? Arthur gave a slight smile. And as my plus one? Alice froze for a few seconds. Is this a problem for you? Arthur asked with his usual teasing tone. She opened her mouth to respond but then closed it. She knew she couldn't refuse without a solid reason. He had given a professional justification, so any refusal would seem personal. Fine, she finally said. But I get to choose my dress. Arthur chuckled quietly. As long as you look presentable, I have no problem with that. Alice rolled her eyes. Does that mean I can go in sweatpants? Not even in your worst nightmares. Alice laughed and grabbed the documents before leaving the room. In the following 2 days, she focused on work, trying not to think too much about the event. But it was impossible to ignore the looks from the employees every time Arthur walked by her, casually saying something as if they weren't about to attend one of the company's biggest events together. On the night of the event, Alice looked at herself in the mirror, feeling strangely nervous. She had chosen a long black dress, elegant but not overdone. Her hair was in a low bun, and she wore light makeup. She sighed before grabbing her purse and heading downstairs to meet Arthur, who had insisted on picking her up. When she stepped out of the building, she found Arthur leaning against his car, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked at her for a moment before saying, "Impressive." Alice raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? Arthur smiled. Yes. She blinked, surprised, but got into the car without saying anything. The drive to the event was silent but comfortable. When they arrived, Alice realized how grand the event was. A luxurious ballroom, guests dressed impeccably, cameras capturing every detail. Arthur got out of the car first and offered his hand to Alice, who hesitated for a moment before accepting it. As she stepped out, she noticed several people staring at them. This was a terrible idea, she murmured. Arthur smiled. Too late to back out now. Alice straightened her shoulders and walked with him into the ballroom. The night was just beginning, but something told her that this event would change everything. Alice took a deep breath as she walked across the vast ballroom beside Arthur. The atmosphere exuded luxury, with grand chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and elegantly decorated tables scattered around the space. The murmur of the guests blended with the soft sound of live music. She felt every eye on her, and for the first time she realized that being beside Arthur Foster wasn't just about working for him. He guided her with ease, as if they were used to attending events together. Alice, however, was aware of the weight of the moment. The office rumors were already intense enough, and now appearing publicly with Arthur would only fuel the speculation even more. Relax, Arthur murmured, leaning slightly toward her. You're so tense. It looks like you're about to run away. Alice gave a half smile, not taking her eyes off the crowd around them. It's not every day I'm the center of attention without meaning to. Arthur gently took her arm and led her toward a group of businessmen. Just focus on what you do best. She raised an eyebrow. Work? Arthur smiled. Challenge me. Alice didn't have time to respond. They were already standing in front of a small group of important people. Arthur greeted them casually, and Alice watched closely as he became the center of the conversation. He spoke confidently, keeping control of each interaction, as if he were playing an invisible game of chess and predicting everyone's moves. It didn't take long for Alice to realize he was testing her again. Every time someone mentioned a strategic point about the company, Arthur glanced sideways at Alice, waiting for her to intervene. At first, she hesitated, but soon she figured out what he wanted: for her to show her worth. So she joined in. The market has been unstable lately. One of the businessmen commented. True, Alice agreed, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. But instability also opens the door for innovation. Companies that know how to navigate tough times are the ones that come out stronger. The businessman looked at her, surprised. That's a bold perspective. Arthur just smiled slightly, pleased. That's why she's by my side. Alice felt a shiver run down her spine at those words. The way he said it, in front of everyone, sounded more personal than it should have. But she ignored the feeling and stayed focused on the conversation. The night continued with more interactions, negotiations, and of course, more speculation about her presence there. Alice was used to being the subject of rumors, but she knew this was different. At some point, Arthur stepped away to talk to an investor, and Alice took the chance to get some fresh air on the balcony. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief. Running away? A familiar voice came from behind her. Alice turned around and saw David Lancaster leaning against the wall, holding a glass of whiskey. "Just getting some air," she replied, crossing her arms. David studied her for a moment before smiling. "You did well tonight." "I always do," he chuckled softly. "I like your confidence." Alice narrowed her eyes. "You're not here just to compliment me, are you?" David took a sip of his whiskey before responding. "Just curious. You and Arthur are close." Alice kept her polite smile, but her tone was firm. "We're professionals." David tilted his head slightly. "And do you believe that?" Before Alice could answer, she felt a presence beside her. Arthur had appeared out of nowhere, his expression slightly dark. "Is there a problem, Lancaster?" David smiled, always calm. "No, just having a friendly chat." Arthur shot him a cold look. "Alice doesn't need your insinuating questions." David raised his hands in surrender. "Of course, I don't want to intrude where I'm not welcome." He gave one last glance at Alice before walking away. Arthur, however, stayed still beside her, watching David disappear into the crowd. "Be careful with him," he murmured. Alice crossed her arms. "I can take care of myself." Arthur turned to face her. "I know, but that doesn't mean I won't step in when necessary." Alice felt her heart race. There was something in his tone, the way his dark eyes were locked on hers, that made her catch her breath. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The tension between them was almost tangible. Alice knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but at that moment, she couldn't stop what came next. "Why did you choose me for this?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Arthur took a step forward, closing the distance between them even more. "Because you intrigue me." Alice felt her heart skip a beat. "You like to test me." Arthur raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on his lips. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean I don't like the answer." Alice felt a warmth rise in her chest. "This feels like more than just a business game." Arthur leaned in slightly, his eyes fixed on hers. "And what if it is?" Alice opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the master of ceremonies announcing Arthur's name for the stage. He didn't move immediately. He kept staring at her for a few seconds, as if waiting for something. Finally, he took a deep breath, stepped back, and said softly, "Don't go anywhere." Then, he walked toward the stage. Alice stayed there, trying to catch her breath. She knew that after tonight, nothing would be the same. And maybe, she didn't want it to be. Alice stayed on the balcony, trying to collect her thoughts as she watched Arthur walk onto the stage. The surroundings seemed to continue normally. Guests were talking, toasting, exchanging smiles, making business promises, but inside her, something had shifted. Arthur Foster never said anything without a reason. He never acted without strategy. But what had happened between them on that balcony didn't feel like just a calculation. It felt real. And that was exactly what scared her. His speech began, and Alice noticed that despite how naturally he spoke, his posture was different. There was something in his gaze, in his tone, that made it clear his mind was somewhere else. That somewhere else was exactly where she was. Applause echoed through the hall as Arthur finished his speech, and he stepped down from the stage with the same calm, calculated demeanor he always had. But instead of blending in with the investors and business people, his eyes scanned the room until they found hers. Alice felt her heart race. She knew she should look away, pretend it wasn't happening, but she couldn't. Arthur walked toward her without hurry, as if he already knew there was nowhere to run. When he got close enough, he stopped beside her and grabbed 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter. He handed one to Alice, and she took it without thinking. "You didn't listen," he murmured, glancing at her sideways. Alice raised an eyebrow. "Listen. I told you not to go anywhere." She let out a short laugh. "I'm still here, aren't I?" Arthur took a sip of his champagne and watched her with that look that made her feel like she was being completely analyzed. You are. The silence between them was heavy, but Alice noticed it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was inevitable, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to fight it. Arthur extended his hand, and she hesitated for a second before accepting. He led her out of the hall, passing by the guests without caring about their curious glances. When they reached the outside of the building, Alice finally broke the silence. If you want to test me, you've already gotten all the answers you needed. Arthur turned to her, crossing his arms. This isn't a test. She stared at him, defiantly. Then what is it? Arthur took a step forward, closing the distance between them. You really don't get it, Alice. His tone was low, almost intimate. Alice felt a chill run down her spine. Get what? Arthur watched her for a moment before sighing and running a hand through his hair, as if considering what to say. I've never had anyone challenge me the way you do. I've never had someone face me and, at the same time, understand me. Alice blinked, surprised. You're saying that? Arthur gave a crooked smile. I'm saying that you disarm me. Alice opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She never expected to hear something like that from Arthur Foster. He wasn't the type of man to admit weaknesses, but there he was, saying exactly that. And the worst part? She felt the same. She crossed her arms, trying to ignore the lump in her throat. Arthur, this can't happen. He tilted his head slightly. Why? Because we work together. Because people are already speculating. Because this could complicate everything. Arthur just smiled wryly. Since when do you fear challenges? Alice took a deep breath, feeling her irritation grow. You always do this. You always provoke me. Arthur nodded. Always. You want me to give in. I want you to stop pretending you haven't already given in. Alice felt her heart race. She wanted to deny it, say he was wrong, but she knew he was right, because, in that moment, everything inside her told her that she had lost this battle a long time ago. And then, before she could think, before she could stop herself, she made a decision. She stepped forward and stood on her toes, capturing Arthur's lips in what was meant to be a quick kiss, just to prove a point. But what started as an impulsive move quickly turned into something more. Arthur held her face firmly, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss in a way that made Alice lose her breath. It was intense, full of everything they had been avoiding for so long. When they finally pulled away, Alice was speechless. Arthur gave a slight smile, running his thumb across her face. So, Alice took a deep breath. I still think this is a terrible idea. Probably. She gave a small smile. But I like challenges, Arthur chuckled softly. I know. Alice looked at him for a moment before intertwining her fingers with his. Then, may the best one win. Arthur squeezed her hand and pulled her closer. I've already won, Alice. And this time, she didn't argue. Because deep down, she knew he was right. Time passed faster than Alice expected. What started as a game of teasing between her and Arthur Foster had turned into something much bigger. They weren't just boss and assistant anymore, or two strategists trying to see who would give in first. They were partners, challenging and growing with each other every day. Arthur remained the demanding, ruthless CEO in business, but with Alice, there was a lightness that no one else saw. He didn't need to say anything. It was in his eyes, in how he protected her without taking away her independence, in how he always made sure she had coffee ready in the morning, and in how, one way or another, he always surprised her. And then, 1 year after that night at the gala event, Arthur decided it was time to truly surprise her. It was a Saturday night, and Alice had just finished work. She was exhausted and eager to get home when she received a message from him. Arthur, meet me at the helipad. Alice frowned. Helipad? What was he up to? Even though she was suspicious, she made her way to the top of the Foster Enterprises building. When the elevator doors opened, Alice felt a slight shiver at the sight before her. Soft lights illuminated the helipad, reflecting off the surrounding building glass. A path of rose petals led her to the center, where Arthur waited, dressed in an elegant black suit with a small smile on his face. She crossed her arms, pretending to be suspicious, though her racing heart couldn't keep up with the act. What are you plotting, Foster? Arthur stepped forward and reached out his hand to her. Just come with me. Alice hesitated for a moment before accepting. The city wind blew around them, and the lights of New York created an almost magical scene. Arthur, what's going on? He held her hands, his eyes locked with hers. "Since I met you, my life has never been the same. I was used to having absolute control over everything, playing by the rules I set. But then you showed up." Alice felt a lump in her throat. Arthur smiled, shaking his head. "You've challenged me from day one. You tested me, irritated me, made me laugh, and made me realize I've never really been alive until I met you." Alice blinked, feeling her eyes burn. Arthur knelt in front of her, holding a velvet box in his hands. Time seemed to stop. "I could spend my whole life trying to find someone who challenges me the way you do, but the truth is, there's no one like you. And I don't want to look for anyone else." He opened the box, revealing a sparkling diamond ring. "Alice Evans, will you marry me?" Alice brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. Never, not even in her wildest dreams, had she imagined Arthur Foster kneeling to anyone. To her. Her heart screamed the answer before her mind could even process it. "Yes." Arthur smiled and slid the ring onto her finger. Before she could say anything else, he pulled her into an intense kiss, full of everything words couldn't express. The wind swirled around them. The city lights shone as if the universe was celebrating with them, and Alice knew, in that moment, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Do you love me, Foster?" she murmured against his lips. Arthur laughed. "Do I need to say it?" "Yes." He cupped her face, looking directly into her eyes. "I love you, Alice. More than anything." She smiled, feeling like the luckiest person in the world. "I love you too, Arthur." And then, as if destiny had been waiting for that moment, fireworks exploded in the sky, painting the city with vibrant colors. It was the beginning of something even more amazing. The wedding took place 3 months later, and it was as grand as any event Arthur Foster would organize. Alice, however, made sure to add personal touches. She wanted it to be about them, about the unlikely love they had built through so many challenges. The event took place in a luxurious garden, filled with white flowers and soft lighting that created a magical atmosphere. There were important guests, but also loved ones, the people who had truly been part of their journey. Arthur, dressed in a flawless tuxedo, stood at the altar, observing every detail with the same attention he gave any big business deal. But when Alice appeared, nothing else mattered. She walked down the aisle in an elegant white dress, her hair delicately styled, and a smile that made his heart race. Arthur wasn't a man who got emotional easily, but in that moment, he felt a lump in his throat. She was, without a doubt, the most precious thing he had ever had in his life. Alice smiled when she saw him there, waiting for her, and knew she had never been so sure of a choice before. When she finally reached the altar, Arthur took her hand, pulling her closer. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "I know," she teased, winking at him. Arthur chuckled softly. The officiant began the ceremony, and everything felt like a dream. When it was time for the vows, Arthur held Alice's hand firmly, looking directly at her. "I'm not a man who believes in destiny, but you made me change my mind. I used to think I had control over everything, that I knew exactly where my life was heading. But then you showed up and turned everything upside down. And I've never been so grateful for that." Alice felt a tear slide down her face. "You taught me that love isn't a game of power, but a partnership. And I want to spend the rest of my life being your partner." Alice took a deep breath before she began. "I never imagined that an annoying, arrogant boss could turn into the love of my life. But you surprised me, Arthur, just like you always do. You challenged me, made me grow, and most importantly, made me happy." Arthur squeezed her hand. "I promise to keep challenging you every day." She added, "I'm counting on that," he whispered, smiling. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Arthur wasted no time. He pulled Alice into his arms and kissed her with all the intensity he felt. The guests applauded, but in that moment, for them, there was only each other. As they pulled away, Arthur whispered against her lips, "You always say I like to win, but this time we both won." Alice smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Forever." And together, they walked into the start of a new life. What did you think of Alice and Arthur's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, what rating would you give this story? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to stay updated on all our stories. And be sure to check out more touching stories by clicking here on the final screen.